Welcome to Whispers by Maga. You're invited to listen to this beautiful story. The Outcast and the Brave. Book 4 of the Untamed Hearts series. Get comfortable, for the magic is about to begin. Prologue. Southern France. Spring. 1815. The inn was old, one of those built with rough stone and creaking beams. Hidden among hills that didn't appear on any map. Travelers who found their way there weren't seeking rest. They came for silence. For anonymity. Elias Blackthorne placed the notebook on the table. His gaze fixed on the empty page yet to be written. The candle cast flickering shadows across his weathered face. And the untouched glass of wine trembled slightly as a gust of wind pushed the window open. He had returned to England once. And then vanished again. But this time, he wasn't alone. A figure stepped across the threshold. Braided hair. Quick footsteps. Eyes as sharp as the dagger hidden beneath her skirt. She carried a linen-wrapped package. Stained with dirt and sealed in red wax. News from the Duke? She asked softly. None. And in this case, that's a good sign. Elias replied without fully looking at her. He kept writing, though each word seemed to weigh heavy as lead. She placed the package carefully on the table. Then we leave tomorrow? He closed the notebook and tied it with a leather cord. As he did, his fingers brushed against a faint mark. The torn edge where once there had been a map. She had stolen it. And yet, he still trusted her. Yes, he said at last. But this time, with caution. Those who played in the shadows still breathe. They've only changed the board. Arabella sat down across from him. Lady Arabella Winter. A woman who once bore a noble name. And who now, haunted by ghosts, secrets, and betrayals, was his only ally. Elias, she whispered, more vulnerable than before. Do you trust me? He looked at her for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes. Only the spark that had once pulled him to the edge of the abyss, and, at the same time, had saved him. I have no choice. He replied with a half-smile. You stole my map and my heart. She smiled too. And in the distance, a bell rang 3 times. Elias stood. That's the signal. She nodded and reached for her dagger. He grabbed the package. Together, they stepped into the chill of dawn. The shadows welcomed them like old friends. And behind them remained only the echo of a story yet untold. A story that, if ever brought to light, could change the course of England. Chapter 1: Echoes of the Past. Elias Blackthorne hadn't slept well in years. Not because of nightmares, but because he remembered too much. The voices. The faces. The broken promises. And the eyes of those who still believed in him. Leaning against the window frame, he watched the fog drift between the trees. Arabella was asleep in the next room. But he couldn't afford that luxury. Not yet. He opened his notebook and began to write again, as he did every night since his return to the land of the living. London. March. 1813. His pen trembled slightly. He remembered that night when he appeared before Isabella, his brother's wife. After 10 years presumed dead. She had looked at him as if she were seeing a ghost. Elias. Just his name. But that single word held an entire history. The reunion was brief. Emotional. Cautious. He didn't reveal everything he knew. And she didn't ask. He turned the page. Blackmore Hall. Summer. 1814. The memory still burned his fingers. It was there he intervened at the last moment to stop the confiscation of a painting hiding state secrets. He appeared in the chapel like a shadow, handing over documents that froze Lord Faircroft's agents in their tracks. No one touches a single canvas in this place, he had said, voice steady, offering a sealed order from the ministry. Neither Juliet, nor Thorne, nor even Reese knew how he'd secured such authority. Only Isabella suspected. Because once, years ago, he'd told her about a network of covert agents. About secrets hidden in art. About things too dangerous to be understood. Elias returned to the blank page. This time, he wrote a single name. Arabella. She wasn't in his past. She was in his present. And perhaps, his salvation. He had found her in Marseille. Fleeing with the map sewn into a corset lining. She had outwitted men far more ruthless than he was. And yet, she chose to trust him with her life. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. Arabella entered. Wrapped in a thin cloak. Her braided hair catching the candlelight. Another sleepless night, she said, sitting across from him. Elias closed the notebook. Memories don't sleep. Arabella looked at him with that piercing gaze that always disarmed him. One day, you'll have to tell me everything. He held her gaze. And so will you. Because that map isn't just an old scrap of paper. She smirked. No. It's a key. Elias narrowed his eyes. A key to what? She stood, walked to him, and whispered. To a conspiracy that didn't end with Faircroft's fall. To something deeper. And you, Elias Blackthorne, are right in the middle of it. He didn't reply. But he knew. What lay ahead wasn't just danger. It was fate, calling one final time. Chapter 2: The Men of the Black Sign. The inn where they were hiding was too quiet. Too still. Elias knew something was wrong the moment he woke. He didn't even need to open his eyes. Arabella wasn't in the bed beside him. Not in the hallway. Not in the kitchen that overlooked the garden. He slipped a dagger under his coat and followed the slope downhill. The ruined monastery loomed like a broken shadow in the mist. That's where he found her. Standing before one of the sealed crypts. The map was open. Spread over a damp stone. That cursed trap of symbols. Why did you bring it here? He asked, bluntly approaching her. Arabella didn't look away from the parchment. Because I recognized it last night, in a dream. A dream? She nodded. This place, it was sketched by hand. Something is hidden here. Something the map doesn't show, but hints at. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Arabella. You can't keep following instincts. She slowly turned to him. And you don't? Or was that not what brought you back to England after 10 years? The tension between them stretched like a drawn bow. Taut. Elastic. Ready to snap, or strike. A sound interrupted them. Not the wind. Leather against metal. Feet on loose earth. They weren't alone. Arabella reacted first. She rolled the map and slid it into her boot. Elias already had his dagger drawn. Show yourselves, he commanded. His voice like ice. A figure emerged from the brush. Then another. And another. 5 in total. All dressed in black. Embroidered in red on their chests, the symbol. An inverted triangle. With an eye at the center. Damn it. Elias muttered. The men of the black sign. Arabella turned pale. Who are they? The remnants of Faircroft's network. Not all were caught. Some went into hiding, others sold themselves to the highest bidder. And now? One of the men stepped forward. Hand over the map. Elias Blackthorne. We don't want to hurt you. Elias took a step forward. Then you've come to the wrong place. And the fight began. They were fast. Silent. But Elias was faster. A dagger to the arm. Another to the leg. Arabella moved at his side. Using the very techniques he'd taught her weeks ago. The fight was brutal. Brief. 4 bodies lay on the ground. One fled. Let him go. Elias ordered when Arabella moved to chase. We need him loose. Let them know we're still alive. Both were breathless. Bloodied. Hearts pounding. Arabella collapsed onto a stone. Still think this is just about a map? Elias didn't answer immediately. Then he stepped toward her. Gently holding her face in his hands. We're going to need allies. And soon. She looked up. Do you trust your brother? I trust his wife. And Reese. And Thorne. Arabella nodded. Then, it's time to go back. Elias nodded as well. To England. To the past. To what we left unfinished. Chapter 3: Beneath the Ashes. Night fell heavy over the southern vineyards. The stone cottage where they took shelter creaked beneath the wind's weight. The fire crackled in the hearth. The only witness to the silence between them. Elias sat before the flames, slowly sharpening one of his daggers. Arabella, wrapped in a blanket, stared into the fire as if searching for answers within its dance. "Have you always fought like that?" she asked suddenly, without looking at him. Elias didn't lift his eyes. "Not always. At first, I only ran. And then? I learned running wasn't enough." Arabella nodded, as if understanding more than she said. Silence returned. But it was different now. Not awkward. Full. She moved closer, sitting beside him. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, revealing a thin scar that crossed her collarbone like a faded trail of fire. Elias noticed. He didn't ask. He simply looked, and then, with unexpected gentleness, brushed the edge of the scar with his fingertips. Arabella didn't flinch. "I'm not what I seem," she whispered. "No one is. Mine is worse. I've done things that don't deserve forgiveness." Elias sheathed the dagger. "And yet, here you are." She turned to him, eyes shining with more than sorrow. "Do you want to know everything?" Elias didn't answer right away, then shook his head. "I want to know when you're ready to tell me. Not before. Not because you feel you owe me. Only because you trust me." Arabella blinked. A trembling light shimmered in her eyes. She didn't cry, but the silence said enough. He pulled her close without another word, and she didn't resist. For a long while, they stayed that way, breathing the same air, sharing the same warmth. No kisses. Not yet. But the way their bodies leaned into each other, the way their fingers intertwined, it was more intimate than any touch. "Tomorrow we cross the border," Elias said softly, holding her close. "And after that? Then, London. And the shadows we left behind." Arabella rested her head against his chest. "Promise me something, Elias. Anything. If this ends badly, if we uncover something too big to control, don't let me walk away." He held her tighter. "I won't." And then, the wind rose, feeding the flames, as if fate had heard. As if it knew that tonight, something had been lit, something neither betrayal nor fear could extinguish. Chapter 4: Echoes of the Past. London woke under a thick fog as the carriage stopped in front of a discreet entrance, flanked by tall stone walls and ivy that seemed to guard the secrets within. Arabella peeked through the curtain. "Are we sure this is the place?" Elias nodded, eyes fixed on the door. "She'll know what to do." The door opened before they could knock. Isabella stood there, simply dressed, hair pulled back, her expression a mix of disbelief and relief. "Elias," she whispered. He said nothing, just stepped down and embraced her, no words needed. Arabella watched from the doorway. The warmth between them was real, but not quite familiar. Not entirely. Isabella looked at him as if she still couldn't believe he was alive. "Who is she?" asked the Duchess, glancing at the gray-eyed woman. "Arabella Winter," Elias answered before Arabella could speak. "She's with me. She's part of this." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "And by this, you mean you're bringing us trouble again?" "It means the trouble never really left." Arabella descended from the carriage, even in her travel-worn dress. She moved with elegance, that blend of pride and exhaustion only known by women who've lived too much. Too fast. "Your Grace. Thank you for your hospitality." Isabella studied her for a moment. Then, to Elias's surprise, she embraced her briefly. "If you're with Elias, you're surely in danger. But you're also in good hands." Arabella tensed, but smiled faintly. They entered in silence. Everything was ready. Rooms prepared, tea served, and a note from the Duke waiting in the study. Elias read it with a crooked smile. "Alexander?" asked Isabella. "He knows I'm here. We'll meet soon." Arabella traced her fingers along the edge of a bookshelf. "This place smells like old secrets." Isabella turned to her. "Welcome to London, Lady Winter. Here, everything smells of secrets." Elias watched her. Arabella had her own, And he wasn't ready to uncover them all. Not yet. But the first step had been taken. And the shadows were starting to stir. Chapter 5 Memory has sharp edges. France. 2 years earlier. The gallery smelled of linseed oil, ancient dust, and despair. Arabella held a brush between her fingers. But her hand no longer trembled. Not anymore. Light filtered through the skylight above, revealing the unfinished mural covering the far wall. She had worked on that restoration for months, not knowing that what she was trying to bring back to life was a trap. That symbol again, she murmured, spotting a faded seal hidden beneath layers of blue pigment. It wasn't decoration. It was a code. One she had seen in the documents her father once guarded before his death. One that had led, one night, to their home burning to the ground. It hadn't been thieves. Nor an accident. You were warned to leave that job, Arabella, said a voice behind her. Her aunt, Madame Villette, entered uninvited, her dark eyes fixed on the wall. I don't like when you call it a job. This is a puzzle. And I hate leaving pieces behind. Your father died for seeking answers where none should look, the woman snapped. I won't let you follow the same path. Arabella didn't answer. She already knew too much. She had seen the names hidden beneath the paint. The symbols matching old reports from the British Army. Marks only a trained spy would recognize. And that's why she took the map. Not for greed, but for survival. She hid it between the hollow boards of her art case. Just before the men in black stormed into the gallery a week later. That night, she fled with nothing but her clothes and the map, wrapped in varnish-stained cloth. And she never looked back. In the room where she now slept, in London, Arabella opened her eyes. Dawn had not yet broken. She reached beneath her pillow and touched the case. The same one. The map was still there. And so was the danger. She closed her eyes. But her mind would not rest. Elias was protecting her. But if he ever discovered what she had done to survive, the choices she made, would he still trust her? Because Arabella hadn't just stolen a map. She had deceived those who once trusted her. And one of those people was Elias Blackthorne. Chapter 6 A Vow in the Shadows. The rain tapped insistently against the windows of the study at Blackmore Hall, lulling the house with a soft, steady rhythm. Arabella stood before the easel, adjusting the canvas she had just begun. She wasn't painting. Not yet. She simply stared at the blankness, as if hoping it held answers. Elias watched her from the doorway. Silent. He had crossed half of Europe with this woman. Faced enemies in the name of a greater cause, and still, he couldn't fully read her. Can't sleep? She asked without turning. Neither can you, he replied, folding his arms. Arabella turned around. She was barefoot, wearing a light robe over her nightdress. Loose hair. Restless eyes. Sometimes I wonder if any of this makes sense, she said softly. If I'll ever stop running, stop hiding. Elias stepped forward slowly. The shadows wrapped around them, leaving only the glow of a lamp on the table. When I found you in France, you were alone. You trusted no one, not even me. And you had a dagger hidden in your coat. She smiled wryly. I suppose we started just as we should have. In the dark. Exactly. A heavy silence settled between them. Arabella lowered her gaze, fingers playing with the tie on her robe. Why did you come for me, Elias? Honestly. He took a deep breath, moved a step closer, until only the canvas separated them. Because I needed you for a mission. Is that all? Elias raised a hand, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Also because, he hesitated, searching for the words. Because when I read that letter at the monastery, I knew your story was part of mine. Arabella stared at him, stunned. What letter? The one your mother hid inside the ledger. It said that if anyone ever came with the map, they were to find you. That you were the key. She paled. My mother always believed she'd die before anyone listened to her. And still, she trusted. In you. In art. In what she left coded and hidden. Arabella swallowed hard. She suddenly felt like a child again, vulnerable and exposed. But something in Elias's gaze held her upright. What exactly did the letter say? He didn't reply at once. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Justice will come with hands stained in ash. And eyes that do not forget." Tears welled up in her eyes, though none fell. Those were her favorite words, she whispered. She wrote them on my bedroom wall, the day they took me away. Elias held her by the shoulders. Arabella, this isn't just my journey. It's yours too. And if there's one thing I promise tonight, it's that I won't let you end like she did. What if it's already too late? She asked, her voice barely audible. Then it'll be our damn war. And he kissed her. Not with fury. Not with haste. It was a deep, lasting kiss, weighted with everything they hadn't said. The kind of kiss that wasn't looking for redemption, but for a vow. When they broke apart, Arabella rested her forehead against his chest. What do we do now? Rest. Tomorrow, we start hunting the real traitors. And I swear on what's left of my soul, none of them will ever touch you again. She didn't answer. But for the first time in years, she felt like she could trust. The storm kept pounding the windows. And in the silence between them, the blank canvas no longer looked like an abyss. Chapter 7: The Half-Open Door. The Duke of Rivington's estate wasn't just majestic. It was quiet. Too quiet. Arabella walked down one of the eastern wing corridors. Her steps muffled by thick carpets. Her heart still racing from everything she didn't dare say aloud. Isabella had offered her a warm room and a fresh gown. Even a place at her table. As if she were part of the family. But Arabella didn't feel part of anything. Behind every kind gesture, there was a question no one voiced. She was the woman who had arrived with Elias Blackthorne. And Elias Blackthorne wasn't a man easily understood. "Are you all right?" Elias asked from the doorway, catching her as she studied a portrait of the Duke hanging in the gallery. Arabella turned. "It's strange," she said. "This place is warm, welcoming. But I can't shake the feeling that I belong somewhere else." "Sometimes," he answered calmly. "The places we're meant to be aren't the ones we choose, but the ones that let us stay." A brief silence stretched between them. Arabella looked down. "Sometimes I wonder if coming here with you was a mistake." Elias stepped closer, without touching her. "If it was, it's the only mistake I don't regret." His words disarmed her. But before she could respond, a soft sound interrupted them. A creak. Faint. Like a footstep on old wood. Arabella turned sharply, just in time to catch a small figure ducking behind a curtain. "Was that?" she whispered. "Thomas," Elias replied, the hint of a smile on his lips. "The Duke's son." Arabella didn't answer. She just stared at the now empty corner. There was something about that boy, even without a clear look, that stirred something deep inside her. Perhaps because, in another life, she too had been a child hiding behind curtains. That night, Arabella sat alone on the windowsill, gazing at the clear sky. Elias didn't come looking for her. He didn't force her to speak. And somehow, that unsettled her more than any confrontation would have. The moon cast silver outlines over the trees. And on her lap, Arabella held the small leather case where she kept the map. She still hadn't returned it. And she didn't know if she ever would. Chapter 8: Traces of the Past. The morning arrived wrapped in mist. It wasn't thick, but just enough to give the Duke's garden a ghostly air. As if every hedge and pathway held secrets of their own. Elias stood outside the library when the door opened. "I knew you'd come early," said a deep, familiar voice. Alexander Blackthorne entered with the same commanding presence Elias remembered. Though there were more shadows in his eyes now. He had aged well. With dignity. But the wounds of the past still pulsed beneath the surface. "You took longer than promised," added the Duke, closing the door behind him. Elias nodded. Somber. "There were reasons. And some, I brought with me." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was necessary. Alexander crossed the room and poured them both a drink. "Is it serious?" Serious enough. Elias replied. And the young woman with you? She's important. Even if she doesn't know it yet. In another wing of the house, Arabella stood before a table covered in old canvases and sketches wrapped in rice paper. Isabella had given them to her discreetly that morning, mentioning they were part of a restoration project Juliet had begun, and perhaps they would interest her. But Arabella had barely been able to breathe when she saw the signature in the corner. See. Montrose. The lines. The strokes. The colors. There was no doubt. It's her, she whispered, as if saying the name aloud might shatter the spell. There was a half-finished portrait. A feminine figure. Eyes half closed. And among the sketches, a fragment of a letter. Incomplete. Yet disturbing. There are things that cannot remain hidden. If anyone ever finds this painting, they will know it was not just art. It was warning. And also, confession. Arabella felt something stir deep within her chest. Later, Elias found her in the study, still seated in front of the canvases. You knew, she said without looking at him. You knew these paintings existed. Elias didn't deny it. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't sure you wanted to know. Arabella stood. Her hands trembled slightly. And what if I don't want to carry the past of a woman who might have been my mother? Elias looked at her, a blend of compassion and respect in his eyes. Then don't. But don't run before you understand the legacy she left behind. And whether it was blood or hope, we'll find out together. For a moment, it looked as if Arabella might break. But she simply lowered her gaze and nodded. Once. And now? Now. He said. We begin uncovering the truth. That night, Arabella didn't sleep. She spent hours studying every brushstroke, every shadow in the paintings. As if Cassandra could speak to her from the past. As if every stroke was a note in a forgotten symphony. But among all the art, it was the letter fragment she kept returning to. And for the first time, something unsettling began to take root in her heart. There was something more hidden. Something that not only changed her story, but could change everything. Chapter 9: The Diary in Shadows. Arabella held the tiny, worn leather journal with trembling hands. Its clasp was broken, and several pages had detached from moisture and age. She had found it deep in the bottom of a box, among lesser documents, but from the first moment she knew it was different. Elias watched quietly from the doorframe, unwilling to touch it. Not yet. Are you sure? He asked, his voice grave. She nodded without looking up. I don't want to guess who Cassandra Montrose was. I need to hear her, in her own words. She opened the first page. London. Autumn 1798. The commission came with a laconic note and a pouch of gold coins. Paint what you see, not what you fear. But how can one separate the two? Minutes passed as Arabella read in silence. Every line seemed inked in blood. Cassandra described a time of shadows. Secret pacts among powerful men. Clandestine meetings masked by art. The painting was an excuse. What they sought was a visual alibi. A veil of beauty to conceal corruption. Elias approached and sat across from her. This confirms what we suspected, he murmured. The mural, the portrait, they are fragments of a truth someone tried to bury. Arabella barely nodded, still absorbed. But she also speaks of a child. A life that needed protection. And a betrayal. Someone close turning on Cassandra. A lover? He asked. She shook her head. She doesn't name him. She only calls him, the silence behind my mirror. Elias frowned. Cryptic. Just like everything in this story. A gentle knock interrupted them. Isabella stood in the doorway, her demeanor serious. There's someone you must see. Now. They followed her to the dim western wing gallery, where covers still shielded most paintings. One, however, had been unveiled earlier. Juliet, paint still staining her hands, waited beside it. Something emerged during the final cleaning layer. She explained without preamble. A figure concealed in the background. A portrait, one that wasn't there before. Elias stepped closer cautiously. Arabella held her breath. The face emerging from the canvas wasn't Cassandra's. It was a man, intense gaze. Solemn expression. A scar across his right cheek. Arabella took a step back. I've seen him before. Where? Elias pressed. She swallowed hard. On one of the maps I stole. Juliet raised an eyebrow. Amused. You stole a map? He shrugged. It was mine. I just didn't know why. Later. In private. Elias laid that map flat across the table. A corner bore a barely visible symbol. A spiral encased within a crown. Know what it means? Arabella asked. Elias nodded, but with caution. Not fully. But I know we're not chasing a painting, we're unearthing an ancient conspiracy. One that could have toppled crowns, if ever it emerged. Arabella shivered slightly. And what now? Elias met her gaze strongly. Now, it's too late to back down. Chapter 10 Confessions Between Brushes and Silence. The east wing of Rivington Hall smelled of flax, beeswax, and aged timber. In the art studio, high windows filtered sunlight, casting golden beams onto covered canvases and solitary easels. Arabella stood before an unfinished painting, not hers. Nor recent. Its strokes held raw power. A force that made her skin crawl. It was clearly Cassandra Montrose's work. Did she hide secrets in her paintings? Too? She asked softly. More than the world is prepared to see. Came the reply. Juliet entered unannounced. Carrying a notebook, a brush, and a glass of wine. She paused beside Arabella, exhaustion written on her face. Did she ever truly live free? Arabella asked. Juliet placed her notebook on the table. No. But she was brave. Like you. Like women who must choose between duty and soul. Arabella lowered her eyes but said nothing. I know who you are. Arabella. Juliet said gently. At least. I understand what you've been through. Oh. Do you? Arabella replied sharply. And what's that? You were taught to distrust. Someone broke your faith, but never your spirit. You flee not out of weakness, but because you know too much. Silence settled heavily between them. Arabella turned slowly. My mother was a forgotten mistress. My father a titled noble and a coward. I grew up watching how appearances swallowed my mother's dreams, while she painted to keep from going mad. Juliet nodded. You inherited her gift. And her burden. Arabella answered. Juliet smiled softly. I too come from a broken lineage. But I found someone who showed me that fragments can still form beauty if assembled with patience. Arabella looked up, curious and suspicious at once. Are you speaking of Thorn? Yes, and of myself. Juliet's voice held nostalgia. It wasn't easy. Nor is living confined by past fears. After a pause, she added. Elias is like a steel blade, cold to the touch. But I've seen how he looks at you. And it's not coldness. Arabella didn't reply. But her throat tightened. I have no interest in a gentleman who collects secrets. And you don't have any? Juliet countered. Arabella opened her mouth to respond, but then paused. Instead, she picked up the notebook Juliet left on the desk. She flipped through pages of sketches, pigment notes, fragments of letters. One handwritten annotation in a different ink caught her eye. What's hidden isn't always in the shadows. Sometimes true danger lies in what no one dares to look at face to face. Did she write this? Arabella began. Cassandra did. Juliet confirmed. We found it behind the frame of one of her works. Arabella traced the words gently. She knew. All along. She knew more than she revealed. Just like you. That evening, Elias stood alone in the winter garden, gazing at the overcast sky. He couldn't sleep, not since Arabella appeared with that map, nor since he saw something in her eyes he thought he had lost. She appeared without a sound, wrapped in a wool cloak, her hair braided like that night in France. Were you going to disappear again? She whispered softly. Elias didn't turn, but his posture went rigid. Sometimes I think about it, But not with you here. Arabella crossed the cold flagstones to stand beside him. Who taught you to look that way? He finally faced her. 10 years in the shadows teach many things. And also how to pretend you don't feel. She asked. I'm not pretending. He replied in a rough whisper. I'm just trying not to fall again. She lifted her hand slowly, brushing a scar on his cheek. A brief, intimate gesture. I have fallen, too, she confessed. But I learned to rise with more vengeance than fear. Their eyes met. No promises. No dramatic confessions. Just a silent understanding and tension that thickened with each passing second. Elias brushed a stray hair from her face. Arabella closed her eyes. For a moment, the world shrank to that single touch. When this ends, she whispered quietly, maybe I'll disappear too. Then I'll have to find you again. He replied, unwavering. Again and again. Arabella swallowed. Promise that if I ever steal your heart, I won't give it back. Elias offered a faint smile. That won't be necessary. I never got it back. In the western gallery above, a figure watched them from the shadows. It wasn't the first time she'd observed from afar. And it wouldn't be the last. Chapter 11. Shadows in the library. The afternoon had settled into a tense silence. Arabella walked through the gallery with firm steps. But her mind was far from the sculptures and portraits lining the walls. Since the previous night's dinner, something felt off. She had watched the so-called Mr. Gainsworth with discreet attention. His presence was polite, even charming, but his eyes were not those of a man interested in art or conversation. They were the eyes of a man on a mission. As she turned down the corridor leading to the library, she stopped abruptly. The doors were ajar. And from inside came muffled footsteps. Not the calm steps of someone browsing a book. The sound was urgent. Someone was searching. Carefully, she approached without making a sound. Her breath caught as she saw a figure crouched beside the desk, rummaging through papers with clumsy haste. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly but firmly. The man, Gainsworth, stood up abruptly, his face lit by the lamp's faint glow. Miss Arabella, what a surprise. She didn't back down, though her heart pounded. She didn't let fear show. Looking for something specific? Just a misunderstanding, he said with a false, courteous smile. I thought this was the music room. Of course. Because private archives are often kept in music rooms, she replied without looking away. Before the tension could escalate, a figure appeared behind her. What's going on here? Elias. Gainsworth tried to compose himself. Lord Blackthorne. What luck to see you. I got lost looking for a book on art history and I believe your curiosity can wait. Elias interrupted coldly. I'll escort you to your quarters. Now. Arabella stayed silent, watching them leave. Only when they disappeared down the corridor did she finally exhale. Minutes later, in the study, Elias closed the door behind him. I knew something was off about that man, he said, fury flickering in his eyes. He's not a noble. Not even a collector. I followed him this morning. He was in the East Wing, where the Restoration archives are. Then he spoke with the butler for nearly half an hour, and now this. Do you think he's after something related to the painting? Or the mural? Or the map? Or all of it? They locked eyes, understanding the weight of the threat. Arabella moved closer to the fire. Uneasy. We're closer than we thought. Aren't we? Elias nodded. Which means they're close too. And now? He stepped forward, his presence intense. Now we protect what we know. And who we care about. The tension between them shifted, turning intimate. Elias reached out, brushing her cheek with his fingers. She didn't pull away. Not this time. I can't let anything happen to you, he murmured. Then don't shut me out, she whispered. I'm not as fragile as I look. He gave a faint smile, full of emotion. I know. That's what scares me. And for a moment, all the danger in the world disappeared as their lips met, not with urgency, but with a silent promise. The war wasn't over. But now they knew who they wanted beside them when it began. Chapter 12. Falling Pieces. Rain lashed against the north wing windows of the manor, as if the sky itself warned them something was coming. Elias walked down the corridor with a grim face. He had called an urgent meeting in the library. Alexander stood, flanked by Thorn, both wearing grave expressions. Arabella, next to Isabella, looked around with growing concern. "What's going on?" Alexander asked bluntly. Elias closed the door before speaking. "Gainsworth is not who he claims to be." A heavy silence fell. "Then who is he?" Thorn asked. "His real name is Percival Haddon. He was a member of the Foreign Affairs Council nearly a decade ago. But after a covert corruption scandal, he vanished. Apparently, someone offered him protection in exchange for loyalty." Alexander crossed his arms. The stance of a general sensing battle. "And now he's back? And he's been prowling our property." Elias added. "It's no coincidence. He's after something. The mural. The painting. The map. Maybe all of it." Arabella stepped forward and placed a small, aged parchment on the desk. "A few days ago, I found this among my mother's forgotten belongings. It's a fragment of coded correspondence. It mentions a key name. Marquis Farrenvale." Isabella paled. "I heard that name years ago, during a conversation between my former employer and a retired officer. They spoke of him as someone who knew too much." Elias clenched his fists. "They're connected. And they're active." Arabella exchanged a look with Elias. "There's more. On the back of the mural, beneath an old layer of pigment, there are symbols. They're not decorative. It's a map. A hidden one. Encoded. But it's incomplete." Thorn frowned. "How do we complete something buried for decades? With what Cassandra left behind?" Arabella said firmly. "With the fragments. With the clues hidden in more than one painting." Alexander turned to Elias. "Then what's the plan?" "We wait for them." Elias replied gravely. "But not as prey. We'll make them think they've won. And when they act, they'll walk into their own trap." That night, in their private chambers, Arabella and Isabella shared a cup of tea. The room was calm, yet heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Do you really think we can expose them?" Arabella asked softly. Isabella looked at her with warmth. "Yes. Because you're not alone. And because what your mother left behind protects more than just secrets." Arabella lowered her gaze. "Sometimes I wonder if she knew the price this would all bring. If she knew that her silence, her paintings, would be the final warning cry." Isabella took her hand. "Maybe. Or maybe she just trusted that someone, someday, would understand. And that someone is you." Somewhere in a dark corner of London, Percival Haddon read a report. His gaze was sharp. His masked accomplice stepped forward. "Are they falling?" "No," Haddon replied. "They're resisting." "Then it's time to move the final piece." Haddon nodded. "Infiltrate the messenger. This time, betrayal will come from within." Chapter 13. Blood Beneath the Mural's Light. The afternoon unfolded with the deceptive calm that precedes a storm. Arabella had promised Thomas to teach him how to use natural pigments, and the boy ran excitedly through the West Wing gallery, where the yet uncatalogued paintings were stored. "What about this one?" he asked, pointing to a frame covered by an opaque cloth. "I haven't seen it before." Arabella approached, her hands stained with red ochre and indigo blue. "You shouldn't be here without an adult, my brave little artist," she joked gently, as she removed the cloth. A chill ran down her spine. The portrait showed a woman with a penetrating and melancholic gaze. No signature. But the brushstroke. The style. Cassandra. A note stuck to the back fell to the floor as she moved the canvas. Arabella picked it up and read softly. "Do not look at the light. The truth lies in the shadow." Her breath caught in her throat. "Arabella," Thomas's voice came softly. There's someone else here. She turned sharply. A tall hooded figure emerged from the far end of the hallway. No doubt, they were coming for something. Or someone. Run. She whispered to the boy, pushing him toward the door. But, run. Thomas. The boy obeyed. The stranger advanced slowly, each step carrying a contained threat. Arabella grabbed the nearest object, a small wooden pallet, and threw it. It missed. He lunged. There was a brief, violent struggle. Arabella tore off his hood. A familiar face. One of the guests. A distant cousin of Lord Thorne. If she remembered correctly. Then the knife flashed. The blade struck her side as she threw herself in front of the man, shielding Thomas. The boy's scream echoed through the gallery just as Elias burst in with a roar. Arabella. The attacker fled through a side window. Elias chased after him for a few seconds. But when he saw the blood, he froze. Arabella collapsed into his arms. Her dress was soaked. Her breathing ragged. Shish. Don't speak. Elias whispered, pressing the wound with a trembling hand. You're going to be fine. I promise. She caressed his face with a weak smile. I lied to you. You know? What? I did steal the map. But not your heart. That was always yours. And she lost consciousness. Chapter 14, The Price of Blood. Chaos had seized Blackthorn Hall. In a matter of minutes, the halls were filled with rushed footsteps, terrified whispers, and cries for bandages, water, help. Elias never let go of Arabella as he carried her in his arms. The wound still bleeding. Her face pale, almost translucent. Prepare the medical study, ordered the Duke of Rivington. Emerging from his library. Call Dr. Mason and someone alert Thorne. Isabella knelt beside Arabella as soon as she was laid on a divan in the study. The cut was deep and jagged. Who was it? She asked. Her face hardened. One of the guests. Elias growled. A relative of the Earl. I recognized him. But he got away. Thomas stood sobbing in the doorway, barely able to speak. Uncle Elias, it was meant for me. She protected me. The boy trembled. Isabella pulled him tightly into her arms. You're safe now, sweetheart. It's over. The Duke's grave voice suddenly rose above the din. This wasn't a robbery attempt. This was a message. Elias looked up. His dark eyes burned with restrained fury. A message from whom? The Duke exchanged a glance with Thorne, who had just arrived, disheveled, frowning. Perhaps from the same one who's been pulling strings from the shadows these past years. Perhaps we haven't uncovered everything yet. Thorne approached Arabella and gently brushed a lock of hair from her face. Do you think they'll try again? I'm certain of it, Elias said. But this time, I won't let them get close. Silence. Then Arabella groaned, barely moving. Elias grabbed her hand desperately. I'm here, he whispered. Don't leave me. She blinked, her voice a mere breath. Thomas. He's safe. Thanks to you. A faint smile. And she slipped back into unconsciousness. That night, while the entire house remained silent and the doctor kept watch over Arabella's fever, Elias locked himself in the old chapel. The mural stared down at him from the walls. And in its colors, the shadows grew sharper. He opened his notebook, drew the face of the attacker, wrote a name, and then a vow. Touch those I love, and you will pay. Prepare yourself. Chapter 13, Blood Beneath the Mural's Light. The afternoon unfolded with the deceptive calm that precedes a storm. Arabella had promised Thomas to teach him how to use natural pigments. And the boy ran excitedly through the West Wing gallery, where the yet uncatalogued paintings were stored. What about this one? He asked, pointing to a frame covered by an opaque cloth. I haven't seen it before. Arabella approached, her hands stained with red ochre and indigo blue. You shouldn't be here without an adult. My brave little artist. She joked gently, as she removed the cloth. A chill ran down her spine. The portrait showed a woman with a penetrating and melancholic gaze. No signature. But the brushstroke. The style. Cassandra. A note stuck to the back fell to the floor as she moved the canvas. Arabella picked it up and read softly. Do not look at the light. The truth lies in the shadow. Her breath caught in her throat. Arabella, Thomas's voice came softly. There's someone else here. She turned sharply. A tall hooded figure emerged from the far end of the hallway. No doubt, they were coming for something. Or someone. Run. She whispered to the boy, pushing him toward the door. But, run. Thomas. The boy obeyed. The stranger advanced slowly, each step carrying a contained threat. Arabella grabbed the nearest object, a small wooden pallet, and threw it. It missed. He lunged. There was a brief, violent struggle. Arabella tore off his hood. A familiar face. One of the guests. A distant cousin of Lord Thorne. If she remembered correctly. Then the knife flashed. The blade struck her side as she threw herself in front of the man, shielding Thomas. The boy's scream echoed through the gallery just as Elias burst in with a roar. Arabella. The attacker fled through a side window. Elias chased after him for a few seconds. But when he saw the blood, he froze. Arabella collapsed into his arms. Her dress was soaked. Her breathing ragged. Shish. Don't speak. Elias whispered, pressing the wound with a trembling hand. You're going to be fine. I promise. She caressed his face with a weak smile. I lied to you. You know? What? I did steal the map. But not your heart. That was always yours. And she lost consciousness. Chapter 15, Echoes of the Past. Arabella opened her eyes slowly. The carved ceiling of the guest room was covered in painted flowers, and the scent of lavender filled the air. Her whole body ached. But her first thought wasn't pain. It was Elias. As if summoned. He was there. Asleep in a chair. Head resting on his arm beside her bed. Elias. She whispered. He woke instantly. Approached without a word. Taking her hand with fierce tenderness. I thought you'd never open your eyes. He said. His voice rough. She looked at him. A tear rolling down her cheek. I thought I'd lost you. He added. And I don't know what I would have done if. Arabella lifted her other hand, placing it on his face. I'm here. She said. I'm not going anywhere. Hours later. In the East Wing Gallery. Isabella, Juliet, and Arabella, now dressed and seated in a wheelchair that Thomas eagerly pushed, shared a cup of tea. You're not getting up until the doctor says so. Isabella insisted. Don't worry so much about me. Arabella replied with a weak smile. The dagger missed my heart. Though, I must admit, Elias struck it long before anyone else. The three women laughed. Juliet took Arabella's hand, studying her intently. Your skin is cold, but your eyes have strength. You're stronger than you look. And more stubborn. Isabella added. Thomas stepped forward with a wooden box. We found this in the secret library. Auntie. It was behind the old painting's frame. Arabella raised an eyebrow as Juliet examined the contents. Inside were several sheets of paper, covered in notes and sketches. Juliet paled. These are Cassandra's, she whispered. Drafts of the murals. And this, she held up one sheet, is a map. Arabella and Isabella exchanged surprised looks. A map of what? Isabella asked. The underground galleries beneath the monastery of Chartres. Arabella murmured. It's the same place Elias and I started from. And it's not all. Juliet added. There's something else. A signature. She turned the page. In red ink it read. The truth lies in the final stroke. C. M. That night, Elias entered Arabella's room while the rest of the house slept. He found her standing by the window in a robe. You'll catch a chill, he said, approaching with a blanket. She didn't answer right away. Then turned to him, eyes shining. Do you trust me, Elias? With my eyes closed, he replied. Arabella stepped closer. Slow but steady. Then listen closely. Whatever we find in that map, we face it together. And if Cassandra is still alive, I deserve to meet her. Even if what she reveals changes everything you know about yourself. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Because I want to know my truth. And because if you're with me, I'm not afraid. Elias kissed her gently. But beneath the softness, a fierce passion brewed. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, two shadows joined at last. To walk toward the truth. Chapter 16, Beneath the Shadow of Legacy. Silence lay heavy over Blackthorn Hall. Broken only by the creak of wood and the whisper of wind against the windows. In the chapel, where the restored painting hung solemnly over the altar, the air seemed thick with secrets yet to be uncovered. Arabella lay reclined on a chaise longue by the window, though the wound in her abdomen had closed. Pain flared with the slightest movement. Elias sat beside her, watching her with the same mix of concern and awe that had filled him since the night he nearly lost her. You should have warned me you were as stubborn as you were brave, he murmured, brushing his hand against hers. She smiled softly, the gesture costing her effort. And you should have warned me you'd fall for a woman who insists on walking when she can barely stand. No complaints here, he replied, more serious than he intended. Then, softening. But we can't take that trip yet. You need time to heal. Arabella nodded, though her eyes sparkled with impatience. I know. But I feel like time is working against us. Which is why we must be smart. Elias said. I've spoken with Thomas. He and Juliet will continue analyzing the inscriptions on the frame and the hidden pigment layers. If there's an encrypted message, we'll find it before going to the monastery. And if the ones after the mural return first, we'll be ready, he assured. We're not alone anymore. Isabella, Alexander, Thorn, even little Thomas. They've all vowed to protect what Cassandra hid. Arabella turned her gaze to the painting. The portrait seemed to watch her with silent intensity. Since learning the truth, she'd begun seeing her mother's face differently. Not as a shadow of the past, but as a silent guide to the future. Do you think she knew this would happen? She asked. Elias leaned closer. Cassandra left nothing to chance. If that painting made it here, to your sister's home, and ended up in Juliet's hands, it wasn't an accident. She closed her eyes briefly. Fatigue still weighed on her. But something stronger than pain burned within, an unyielding need to complete the journey. Then we'll wait. But as soon as I can, we leave. Elias smiled faintly, touching her cheek. This time, we go together. And no one will tear you from my arms. Arabella. She entwined her fingers with his. Never again. In the distance, the chapel bell rang once. Not a warning, but a sign of hope. Outside, night began to yield to dawn. And while Arabella rested, in the darkest corners of power, Cassandra Montrose's enemies stirred once more. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the board was set in their favor. Chapter 17, Ashes and Oaths. The air in Blackthorn Hall was thick with smoke and memories. Elias stood before the fireplace, the last remnants of a letter turning to ash in his hand. He had read it twice. He had burned it slowly, but its contents were carved into his mind. Arabella entered quietly, still wearing the riding cloak she hadn't taken off since their return. Was it from the Duke? She asked. Elias nodded. They found the last name on the list. And? He's dead. Poisoned. Just like the others. Arabella exhaled. Then it's true. They're tying up loose ends. Yes. And we're next if we're not careful. They had returned to England with secrets powerful enough to shake the crown. Names. Transactions. Betrayals at the highest level. And now, they were being hunted. We need to move faster, Elias said, his voice hoarse. if we want to make it to Parliament before they shut us down. Arabella stepped closer. We'll make it. Together. He looked at her. And for a moment, the world faded into silence. You still trust me? Always. Their fingers brushed. It was not a kiss. Not yet. But it was a promise. Chapter 18, A Name in the Shadows. The corridors of Parliament echoed with polished shoes and whispered deals. Lady Arabella Winter, dressed in mourning black, slipped through the side entrance with a forged badge and a stolen agenda. Elias followed her. Is it here? He asked. She nodded and handed him a small scroll sealed in red wax. It's the ledger. The original. He took it. The document was proof. A decade of covert operations. Payoffs. And the names of those who had orchestrated war for profit. They walked silently until they reached the door. Behind it, the committee awaited. Are you ready to burn your past? Arabella whispered. Elias looked at the scroll. No. I'm ready to burn theirs. They entered. Chapter 19, The Reckoning. The room fell silent as Elias placed the scroll on the table. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. Some widened. Some hardened. He spoke clearly. Without tremor. My name is Elias Blackthorne. Son of the late Earl of Dunley. Former agent of Her Majesty's Special Council. Gasps. Whispers. He looked at each of them. This document contains the truth about the war in Spain. The names of those who used it for personal gain. And those who died for their silence. A member of the committee stood. These are serious accusations. They're not accusations. They're facts. He handed over the ledger. Arabella stood at his side. We've risked everything to bring this to light. There was a long pause. Then, slowly, the scroll was opened. One by one, the names were read aloud. One by one, the masks fell. Epilogue, The Edge of the World. Scotland. Summer of 1816. The cliffs were green and fierce. Just like her. Arabella watched the sea crash against the rocks. Barefoot. Wind in her hair. Behind her, Elias emerged from the cottage carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You're up early, he said. Couldn't sleep. I kept dreaming of the ledger. It's over now. She turned to face him. Is it? He smiled faintly. For them. Maybe not. But for us, yes. He kissed her forehead. They stood in silence for a while. Then she asked. Do you ever miss it? What? The danger. The thrill. The secrets. He raised an eyebrow. Have you looked in the mirror lately? She laughed. Finally. And in that moment, with the wind behind them and the world at their feet, they were no longer fugitives. They were free. Thank you for joining me for this beautiful story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did sharing it with you. If you liked it, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Whispers by Maga, so you won't miss any of my upcoming releases. Until next time, and may the magic always be with you.